closely to actually my team and the people on the Marañón, right? So it's pretty cool. We have Ellie here. She's tuning in from Austria, I think. We have Sembra from Montenegro, David from Italy, who's at his parents' place, I think, still, Sicily, right?
Sicily, yeah.
Enjoying the wine and the food. And then Jens is tuning in from Munich. That's pretty much it. Hi, Ellie.
Hi, guys. I'm just still in my office, so I'm gonna keep everything turned off, but I will listen.
And then we have Nathan tuning in from Toronto, right?
Yes, hello.
Natalie, wait, Natalie based in, tell me again.
From Washington.
Washington.
United States.
Luigi just made it up all the way to Cocachimba in Peru.
Cocachimba in Amazonas.
Exactly.
Yes.
And the three of them are going to talk a bit about Marañón and Luigi about what he does there to save to protect the river from being dammed by 20 hydropower dams. And Natalie as well as Nathan have both been involved in some research and have some further plans to do research on the river. And I think pretty much motivated by those plans for hydropower dams to stop and to actually value the river as it is. So I think it's a really cool combination, and I'm curious how this comes together. And it's a cool meet up also. I think Natalie and Nathan have never met really.
No,
So,
nice to meet you, Natalie.
Nice.
Cool. Let's start.
That's my mother-in-law in the background.
Hi.
Hi, Mom.
Hi.
Cool.
So, you want to?
Well, Luigi,
No.
tell us.
Yes.
How did you get on the Marañón? What's your story? What's your background there?
I'll share my screen. I actually have some pictures that I can explain a little bit about the story of the project that I got involved and what we've been doing lately. So to start from there, I think I can still show you some this. Basically a compilation of my favorite pictures.
I don't see anything, so I don't know.
No, I'm just. Is that working?
Yeah.
That's it, right? Sorry. So the main source of the Amazon, I think we all know, we all heard and do a lot of work in Marañon, but that's a cool map about showing the headwaters of the Marañon. So more than 100,000 people depending on the river in the Marañon. The Aguajún people, the fishing in the river, all the fish. That is the main source of most of the people living there. The fertile land, all the crops, all the fruits that the people grow there. The river is also the place where the kids play, where they learn how to swim. The super unique forest, the tropical dry forest of the Marañon that is there. Hotspot of biodiversity, and for the bird life, according to BirdLife International, it's a hotspot of endemic species. More than 16 endemic birds only in the canyon, like this yellow-faced parrotlet. It's a really cool bird to see, and you can only see it there. Lots of ancient paintings. Temples more than 5,000 years old, sacred sites, all this crazy landscape, and canyons. This is in the upper stretches of the canyon, and all this geology, hot springs, places that are really from like fairy tales. whitewater, of course, which is one of the cool things what we enjoy most doing, and brown water also when it gets really big. So I heard all this because I love kayaking, and I got involved with this project that Ben started. We all know Ben here, and he started paddling with purpose in 2013, and that's when he came to Peru and joined an NGO in Peru. And in 2014, I joined to this project as a volunteer. So that's when we started sharing information about the river, and it was a campaign about making a trip to film a documentary. So we did day trip runs with people from Lima. We did research and we shared information, finding out all these facts about the impacts of dam that we all know about sediment and blocking the connectivity and all the methane emissions from the reservoirs, all the impact in the fishes and the indigenous towns, campesinos, having vulnerability for their lives, and how all these crops will be lost, all the high biodiversity, the fact that we know that Peru already has more energy, more options in solar and eolic, wind energy, right? That we have really good opportunities to do that here in Peru. So then it was the question of how we can help, right? So we said, okay, let's promote conservation and recreation in the river. That's what I most focus on, and developing sustainable tourism and the sustainable usage of the native forests, and sharing, promoting sustainable ways to get energy and to promote scientific research. So from then, also some legal work that we do as Marañón Waterkeeper now, and some legal support to the local defense. So, well, I have a longer. I don't want to keep talking. These are some other pictures from that first trip that we did in 2015. We did lots of interviews, and we wanted to document all the places and start sharing with the local people about the river, some of the organizations that we collaborate with. And well, this is the trip when this documentary, we didn't end up finishing the documentary, and we talked with Henry and Natalie's team and the team that on that same 2015 year did a trip. So we joined forces to bring this movie out, and we put a lot of effort in promoting it, in sharing it, in promoting screenings and stuff. We took it to the river and screened it to the local people. And well, since 2016 that we did that first trip as Marañón Waterkeeper, we've been doing trips, and with Ben now we have Marañón experience, and we are trying to take more tourists into the river and involving more research and facilitating the access to all the researchers that want to come to the river. We've been taking lots of biologists and lots of geologists and engineers from a water research center from Lima, and different projects like the project that we're working on with Nathan now, and really helping on promoting more research, because it's an ecosystem that is really well understudied, as well as the impacts of dam in this type of rivers. So super cool to make this more accessible. And I have some news from the Marañón. Yesterday I drove over the brand new Balsas Bridge, second double lane bridge being built on the Marañón. The first one is the one near the takeout, Corral Quemado, one of the main highways that go to the jungle. So we're seeing how the development is coming to the river really fast, and yeah, helping bring sustainable tourism and more research to the place, so decisions can be made with more information, and we can know a bit more about this super special river. I don't know if I took my whole 10 minutes, but I didn't want it to use more time.
You didn't even indeed. But I think it were an
Awesome.
important few
Thanks,
minutes.
Luigi.
Yeah, really cool.
I have some other pictures. This is when Robert JFK from the Waterkeeper Alliance came, and 2016 we helped put out this it was not a law or anything, just the current government said, okay, we're not gonna plant dams, but we're already on the next government, and we're still working on having something legal, more certain about that, and now we're working really hard in this conservation area. We bought with Ben, we bought 2 hectares in 2017, and we got 2 more in February. So we have a property now in the Veracruz impact zone, just 1 kilometer above the supposed dam site. So we're looking to make this place into a conservation area, to have a research center, and to also make it into a beautiful place where researchers can go and we can learn more about the forest, about the river, and have a nice camp for tourists to come. So yeah, that's a funny picture when we actually got the first place, and that's a cool overview from the land. The land that we got is all this kind of shoe-shaped thing, and this year we got this other side of the creek, both sides, so all these parts. And this is where we took all these biologists to make an inventory, and they already declared it in the forestry zonification. From the forestry system, they made a zonification last year, and they were looking for declaring certain fragile ecosystems that had priority for conservation. So thanks that we have this project going on there, because it needed involvement from an organization and from the local community. They declared like this area and a bigger area as a priority site for conservation in Amazonas region. So that's also a pretty cool thing, and that's the pools up there that Natalie, you also know those pools. So it's a really cool place. We're looking forward to protect and to make it into just a beautiful place where people can go and learn more about the forest and enjoy the river in a healthy way.
Cool, thanks, Luigi.
This was our sign. It lasted 2 years, and then we don't know if a big storm just washed it away or something.
These signs, really?
The sign, yeah, we lost the sign on the last flood, on the last big rainy season. So we're gonna have to do a new one.
That's doable. Cool. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I'm gonna stop sharing my.
Thanks, Luigi.
Yeah, I guess you guys
you're welcome.
better go, right? Because
Sorry.
Nathan, you met Luigi, and now you're working together to actually set up a proposal, right? So let's
we've been. I met Luigi just a couple months ago, actually, through Ben, of course, and working together now to work on a proposal to do a big inventory of the Marañón aquatic biodiversity inventory. So not focus so much on the forests and the birds and the herps, but on the aquatic biodiversity. Do you want me to go next, or do you want to? Okay, great. Well, let's see. How do I start my video and talk?
Yeah, some cool questions are coming in already from Jens. He's doing well on the questions, I think. If anyone else has questions, either keep them or already write them. We'll go over them later. But Nathan, you first.
Okay. Just working through sharing my screen a minute.
Yeah, perfect.
How is that?
Perfect.
Okay, great. So yeah, my name is Nathan Lujan. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the American Museum of Natural History currently in New York. And I come to this from the biologist angle. I grew up in well, I'll just give kind of a brief introduction to me and my, what I bring to the Marañón, and some of these issues that Luigi was discussing. Of course, we're all familiar with the Marañón. Well, many of us are familiar, have actually been to the Marañón, are familiar with this drainage basin, and the reason we're all interested in this now is because of this threat, these 20 hydroelectric dams that will just tremendously fragment the basin. And I'm passionate about these questions because I grew up originally in Middle Tennessee and in the southern United States, which is an area with a lot of water and a lot of aquatic biodiversity. It's a hotspot of aquatic biodiversity. And then I went to school in Michigan, in Grand Rapids, Michigan. I started my career as a professional biologist about 20 years ago, teaching a course in, well, helping to teach a course in winter stream ecology. And that was a January term course where we took students out and into the streams, and we looked at these leaf packs and the aquatic insects that live in those leaf packs. And I just grew fascinated with the variety of different forms of aquatic insects, their mouth parts, and how they partitioned resources within the stream, how they fed on different things, how what one insect did in terms of feeding facilitated the lifestyle and the ecology of other insects downstream. And what really intrigued me from all this was this synthetic ecological concept, the river continuum concept. And that has a number of aspects to it. One primary aspect is this prediction that these aquatic insects in a stream will shift, the relative abundance or the relative diversity of those aquatic insects will shift from headwater streams, where you will find a lot of insects called shredders that feed directly on the leaf pack, that digest that coarse organic debris and into smaller fragments. And then as you go downstream, you start to see an increase in collectors, these insects that live off those fragments. And then you ultimately get to an area with more scrapers, insects that feed on algae and primary production, and not so much on organic material that's entered the stream from outside of the wetted channel. And in parallel with that, you see this shift from streams that are predominantly respiratory, that is, they're digesting detritus from organic material from outside the stream, to channels that are productive, that they're producing organic matter themselves autochthonously or within the stream channel through primary production. And so this links different parts of the channel along a longitudinal gradient and demonstrates the ecological importance of longitudinal connectivity. And this really stuck with me from an early stage in my career as a biologist, and it's influenced everything I've done since then. And when I think about longitudinal connectivity, and when I think about disruptions to longitudinal connectivity, like what is threatening to occur in the Marañón, this is the concept that that kind of backstops everything, all of my thinking. Now, after teaching winter stream ecology and immersing myself in macroinvertebrates, I got a job back home in Tennessee working for the Tennessee Valley Authority, which is in the United States. It's the largest federal public power provider. They run about 34 hydroelectric dams in the Tennessee River watershed, which is the most biodiverse watershed in North America, and there are some drainages within the Tennessee that are the most biodiverse, have the greatest concentration of aquatic biodiversity anywhere in the northern temperate hemisphere. Excuse me. And so we're talking 350 species of fish, a couple hundred species of unionid mussels, freshwater mussels, a lot of macroinvertebrates. And I was hired as a macroinvertebrate taxonomist to participate in these field surveys throughout the Tennessee Valley, because the aquatic insects are a standard organism or group of organisms that are used by the Environmental Protection Agency to monitor water quality, and in particular the relative abundances of these particular groups of aquatic insects that are particularly sensitive to water quality, called the EPT taxa, which you're probably familiar with, the mayflies, stoneflies, and caddisflies that are quite diverse here. And diversity approximately corresponds to water quality. So what really fascinated me about this is that you can look at the community in a given place and get an indication of water quality. And what is unique about the TVA biomonitoring system is that they collect insect data, and I collected insect data for them, but really their main focus, and I was part of a team whose main focus was on the fish community. And they have an elaborate quantitative matrix that allows them to score a given site based on the ecological integrity of the fish community. And what really amazed me and what struck me about this was that this is considered economical. TVA is not they're not interested in this for just because they're interested in fish. They're interested in an economical means of monitoring water quality throughout the basin. And fish community assessments, these kinds of indices of biotic integrity, are valuable because they can be sampled on approximately a 5-year rotation. The fish community turns over approximately every 5 years. And so you don't have to sample every year, you don't have to sample every month. And really, for many impacts to water systems, those impacts are temporary. They're associated with flood pulses. A pollution event might occur and then disappear. And if you're not there right at the time that the pollution event occurs or the rain event occurs, you're not going to capture it. It's going to disappear downstream, and the after effects will be detectable, though, for years up to years later by looking at the fish community. So this really struck me as someone who's biologically oriented and who loves biodiversity, as a really practical, economical application of ecological knowledge. But in order to use this, we really need to understand the role that each organism plays in the environment, and the response that we would predict would occur in each guild or in each subset of organisms within the environment in response to specific perturbations or impacts. So in one way in which we do that is via functional morphology, is by looking at the organism, looking at the mouth parts, looking at how it interacts with its environment, and what kind of things it might feed upon. And this really fed into my graduate research program, which was focused on this amazing radiation of catfishes in South America, the sucker-mouth armored catfishes. Here we see this tremendous variety of mouth parts associated with these catfishes. Now, this family of catfishes, this clade, this radiation, currently contains over 1,000 species, all of which are endemic to tropical South America and a little bit into Central America. They have this tremendous diversity of ecologies and morphologies, and you can't see that so much in these photographs, but they're distinguished by having this armor plating on their bodies and bodies covered in external teeth called odontodes. And of course this ventral oral disc that's very distinctive and different from just about any other fish you can think of. So most of these species are algae scraping. Many of them are the aquarium, the glass cleaners you buy to put in your tank to keep algae down. But there are a number of lineages that have evolved this specialized feeding morphology to feed on wood. They have teeth shaped like a carpentry instrument, like an adze, to gouge wood particles out. and then here we see these external teeth. These are clusters of external teeth in some lineages that can be forcefully everted from the cheek and as part of this opercular mechanism. And they just have really interesting behaviors. They build nests, they care for their young. These are embryos that were on the underside of a rock that we turned over. That's the male that's guarding those young. And then here we see just how fascinating and cool they are. I mean, some of them are very colorful, boldly patterned. And so it's just a really cool group to look at. Well, this group is what originally brought me to the Marañón on my first expedition there in 2006. One of the intriguing groups from a functional morphology and an ecological perspective within Loricreidae are these wood-eating Loricreids. And I asked, in 2005 or so, I was just a couple years into my PhD program, and I had some funding to go to Peru. And I asked Hernan Ortega, who's the premier ichthyologist of Peru in Lima, where would I go in Peru to find wood-eating Loricreids? Where's the greatest diversity of wood-eating Loricreids? And he said, well, we haven't done a lot of work in the Marañón, but what we have done seems to suggest that there's a lot of wood-eating Loricreids there. So, and any kind of biodiversity inventory there would be valuable. So some colleagues and I put together an expedition there. We went to Santa Maria de Nieva, which is just upstream of the Pongo de Manseriche, where the Marañón blows through the Andes and exits into the Amazonian lowlands. And in a wood debris dam just a couple hundred meters from Santa Maria de Nieva, we collected hundreds of wood-eating Loricreids of 5 different species that co-occur together on the same wood debris dams. So here we're looking at fishes that are similar to those insects that live in leaf packs in the Michigan streams where I got started as a biologist. We're looking at these organisms that are processing coarse woody debris or organic detritus on a much larger scale than those shredding kind of insects. We're looking at fishes that fill a similar kind of niche. And there were a number of questions, just unknown aspects of the biology of these fishes that were very curious. Are they digesting wood? Are they subsisting off of this very recalcitrant kind of detritus? We know that it was filling their guts. We know that they had teeth that were very distinctive that allowed them to feed on this wood. But what was it from a nutritional physiological perspective that allowed them to persist on this diet? And so I had a collaborator along on that, Donovan German, who really made that the focus of his dissertation. My focus was on the functional morphology of the jaws that you can see here, the different shapes of the jaws, and what are the biomechanical ramifications of that. And I can talk about all of that a little bit later, but not to go into too much detail here. We have this fish filling a macroinvertebrate niche. And this is a distinctive characteristic of tropical rivers in general, is that you find fishes, a large amount of the biomass, a majority of the biomass, and many freshwater tropical fish assemblages are detritivores. They're feeding on this organic detritus. And we know from temperate studies, from these kind of river continuum concept studies, that there's a gradient in the distribution of detritus that then regulates the longitudinal distribution of organisms feeding on that detritus. So what I'm still very curious about is whether that distribution of detritus then dictates the distribution of these kinds of consumers in the river continuum. And so my first really big attempt to address that question was in a second expedition to Peru in 2010, where we went to southern Peru. I would have loved to have done this in the Marañón, but access to the Marañón is really difficult throughout the entire basin. And there was a new highway just built, being finished in 2010, the Transcontinental Highway that went from Puerto Maldonado up the Andes all along a single river basin, the Inambari Basin, and then went over the Andes and down to the Pacific coast. So with just this one road, we could access a single river basin from its source at 4,200 meters above sea level all the way down to the Amazonian lowlands at about 200 meters above sea level. Here's just a map showing our sample sites, you know, straight along the main river channel from very high elevations down to low elevations. And in order to understand the impact of longitudinal gradient and longitudinal position on aquatic communities, we sampled a number of water physical chemical parameters. We sampled algal or epilithon diversity. We sampled macroinvertebrate diversity and fish diversity. And we observed a number of really interesting aspects of this along the longitudinal gradient. I mean, we noticed some things that we predicted and that were have been observed elsewhere, and that is these elevational gradients in diversity. As you go up in elevation, you go down in diversity of macroinvertebrates and fishes. There's some suggestion that we went up in diversity in terms of epilithon diversity, algal diversity. Macroinvertebrates took a really big hit as soon as fishes showed up. So fishes don't occur above about 2,500 meters above sea level, but at 2,500 and below, macroinvertebrates abundance dropped by half immediately. And all the fishes from at those higher elevations are invertivores. There were no herbivores until you get lower, and then it's not until you get below about 600 meters above sea level that you really start getting the full complement of Amazonian fish diversity. A lot of the weird things, electric fishes and wood-eating loricreids and so forth. What really intrigued me in going back to this river continuum concept was this pattern that we saw in macroinvertebrates. Here's that pattern a little bit larger. And so what we see here on the x-axis,
just a quick reminder that like we would also love to hear Natalie for a bit, and I think we're all super intrigued by everything you're telling, but it would be cool too.
Okay. So just we saw some interesting longitudinal gradients in macroinvertebrates, and we want to go back to the Marañón to fill data deficiencies in the fish community. Threat assessments such as those produced by the IUCN are all dependent upon range distributions of fishes about which we know nothing. We want to establish a permanent record of biodiversity in the Marañón, collecting specimens that will be a reference for future generations. An independent record of ecological integrity. You know, the people building these dams are required to do an environmental impact assessment, but that frequently goes to the lowest bidder. And it's not always a very trustworthy data set. So it's good to have an independent data set to compare with what the consulting companies are generating in association with these dam construction projects. Just establishing the distribution of species helps model the potential impacts of hydroelectric dams. Right now, there's a lot of work going into the placement of hydroelectric dams and minimizing environmental impacts by optimizing the position of dams within the watershed. So you kind of avoid main channel sites and the potential impacts to migratory species. And then with a better understanding of ecological connections, predict environmental impacts. And then just discovery. I was back in the Marañón 2 years ago and did this little bit of a survey of the headwaters and found a lot of really cool species, some new species, and there's a lot yet to be discovered about the Marañón. And I'm sure with a more comprehensive inventory, we'll find a lot of exciting new aspects to the aquatic biodiversity there. So that's all for me.
Super cool. Thanks, Nathan.
You're welcome.
Yeah, Luigi has been mentioning this catfish that's eating wood and not actually using it. And like I was already intrigued, but you made it even more special just seeing the photos with it also. And it's cool. Like Natalie, who's going to talk, I know that she's doing a lot of work on actually monitoring how much wood is going through rivers, and just linking those two is already super interesting, right? So let's go to Natalie and have some questions afterwards. I'm sure there's going to be quite some. I think we're still seeing your screen. Probably you have to go to the top and there should be a stop sharing.
Yep, there we go.
So thanks a lot for this presentation already.
You're welcome.
Let's have to Natalie. Cool. You might be still mute yourself, Natalie. We don't hear you at least. We do see your screen, but we don't hear you yet.
Second. Okay, now
There we go. Yeah, perfect.
it's really cool to be here actually and see Luigi, and then to hear about Nathan's work, because I feel like a lot of what I ended up getting involved with has been sort of in tandem with both of these trips, but we've never met before. So this is amazing. This is what the River Collective, I think, science chats are all about. And so thank you so much, Vera, for instigating this. And it's putting some of my work and some of my thoughts into perspective and what everyone else is doing, which is amazing. So and I want to give you a little bit of, I think my talk's I'll draw a little bit actually about what Luigi presented and what Nathan presented. So it's cool to go last. So in 2015, I'm gonna just give a little background. We went on this trip, and it was the Marañón project. I think it was happening the same exact year that Ben Webb was putting his paddle for the Marañón. And essentially what it was there's a group of friends that instigated this trip that used to all be Colorado River guides together. And I got the sense that they wanted to do a trip together overseas before they kind of settled into other aspects of their lives, but that also had meaning. And one of their friends, Alice Hill, was a hydrologist doing some PhD work, and they're like, well, let's collect some data and get some baseline data, because in these really remote places it's hard to get, and like Nathan said, once you have you need a third party to get data besides the people who want to develop the river corridor. So that was sort of the opening of the trip, and they're planning this trip. And they also had they're river people, so they had some river friends from other countries from their travels, Argentina and some other places. And they heard about the Marañón because of Rocky Cantos's work with Sierra Rios, really trying to get more people to realize this amazing place. So he had written a couple of just articles in some of the paddling magazines, and I think that's how they kind of knew and wanted to do this trip. I got invited on this trip, I would say 2 months before it happened. So as sort of hey, we have another spot, let's flesh out some of our scientific work. I was friends with another scientist, kayaker on the trip, Jamie Good. And so I reached out, and looking back on it, it's pretty incredible. Within that, couple months, I didn't have I beat myself up about it at the time for not having more of my own science collection on the trip, but I think that's okay given my time frame. What I ended up doing, so as Vera mentioned, my PhD work, was just finishing up my PhD. I wasn't quite done with it. I was really concentrating a lot on driftwood. So I'm a geologist who studies the impacts of wood in rivers and how important it is, and how important it is with where the wood comes from and where it goes in the basin. And when you put in dams, it does fragment that wood delivery downstream. And so it's interesting to hear Nathan talk about these fish that depend on it, because mainly in my science background, we historically have thought about rivers depending on your water, your flow, your sediment, and then your invertebrates is a good indicator. But we, as geomorphologists, are starting to think about this tripod on our rivers as sediment, water, and wood. And it's that downed wood, the sediment, and the water that really sets the template for how the animals live and use the place. And so you can't think about dam impacts without thinking about that wood delivery downstream. So I was invited on the trip a little bit last minute, I'd say. In that time period, I had gotten some National Geographic grant to help with field work in my PhD, and I reached out to my grant officer and said, hey, this trip is happening. It's self-funded, people are paying for it themselves, but we're doing this kind of cool science collection. So I kind of got an inside, like, we'll give you 10 grand through National Geographic. And so, well, I guess that's getting ahead of myself. This is just showing our transect with all of our sampling. And we did end up on the trip sampling for invertebrates, for sediment, by mainly pebble counts, and some drone imagery, and then a lot of water chemistry happened on the trip. This goes back to, like, at the time, so I got this 10 grand from Nat Geo to help subsidize the trip. And with that money, I put it towards paying for the travel costs for the videographer and for the scientists. I also was thinking hard about the team's goal of, hey, we want a baseline data set. I knew that the water and sediment were being taken care of through Alice and Jamie. And I said, well, if you guys really want to know about the health, we should probably sample invertebrates. I'm a geologist, I know nothing about this. So I reached out to the Natural History Museum of Lima in the end, and I ended up getting in touch with also Florencia Trama, who has written some books about the invertebrate species in Peru. And it was a flurry of 2 months to do all this connecting with people. But in the end, Diana and Florencia ended up helping a lot with permits. So I ended up getting a permit through the Peruvian government for our trip. To actually be able to sample what we wanted to sample. And they both were able to send along a scientist. So Florencia sent along a protege of hers, Stephanie, to sample invertebrates. And then we also, Jorge, the museum sent along someone. And I had one spot on the trip for me. So to bring these people on, I ended up only going on the first third, so the upper canyon of the trip. And then I swapped out my spot for Jorge, who came and sampled the metal for the museum. And then I swapped out my spot again, or he swapped out his spots for Stephanie. So we sort of split my time on the river into 3. And I used the National Geographic funds to pay for all their travel. And then Jorge was already paid through the museum. But Stephanie, I gave her a stipend, like a job, I guess, some money to come do the work, basically, through the National Geographic grant. And so that's sort of how the trip worked at the time. And now looking back, I wished I had kind of played into my expertise and actually sampled more of the driftwood. But I was so focused on doing getting all this invertebrate stuff to happen. And if I do another trip, I have been thinking about how I would actually sample for that driftwood in a future study. The collaborations ended up being key for me because when Jamie brought the drone in, it got confiscated in customs, and they sent us to the Department of Transportation. And my Spanish is like okay, but we got through this. I had to get like a flight pilot permit through the Department of Transportation. And what saved me was Diana had written before the trip from the museum a letter of collaboration with the museum in Lima. And so that was like a key component for us. And if you're thinking of doing these trips to other places, I think some people can be like daunted by maybe like going to a different country and trying to figure out how to do it right. And you have a tendency as a scientist, well, let's just kind of go and collect. But I think it is really important to respect the place that you're going and kind of let people know sometimes through official means what you're doing, because then they know what you're doing. And that's paying off now. Just this week, I got a notice from the department. They're forming a research agency, and maybe Luigi knows more about this, but I've gotten a request now for the data and the information from our trip. from these people in the government who are forming a research agency. So I can go into more of that later, but we got the drone in. Also, the invertebrate samples we collected had a place to go, so they're all at the museum now. In the end, I feel like the trip for the 10 grand that we got from National Geographic, and then people just doing it, you know, kind of funny. We actually had a lot of output for what we did, and you know, I kind of put a laundry list up here about some of the stuff we collected, and I can talk a little bit more specifically about some of that for questions. I do have a link here to a report that I just put together with links to all of the different posters and the articles and the gray literature reports and things that came out of the trip. And one of the products was this documentary, and I was blown away with the documentary when Henry finally came out with it. And I think that's in part because of the tandem research and work that the Paddling for Purpose did on their trip. And I think by being able to combine those efforts in the end, really made a powerful product. And one thing I really learned about why we were able to be somewhat successful in this trip for generating a lot of different products was the simple fact that we had a lot of people with a lot of, everyone was on their trip and they're doing their part because they were interested in doing their part for themselves. Like Alice had a PhD that her work was feeding into, and Henry was doing the film partly to launch his career as a documentary filmmaker. You know, Jamie was a professor and needed help with she had students who needed like student projects, and so she was able to use some of that data. So you had, you know, Nancy Moore, who is really involved with the Food and Water Keeper and she likes to write, and so she wrote you know, articles afterwards. We had Ezekiel, who is a person interested in environmental law, and he wrote some blogs afterward about the trip and environmental law. So we had a lot of these, instead of having one trip where it was a vision of one person and everyone was feeding into that one product, we had just this natural grouping of people, each producing their own stuff. And when you put it all together, I've been impressed. I would say for me, the biggest, looking at that documentary and watching it, the biggest sort of thing for me was be able to see what the Peruvian scientists that I brought on the trip got out of, like what they were able to get out of the trip was, I think, one of the most important parts of the expedition. And I just play a couple clips that I think really exemplifies this from the documentary. Oops, play. Hopefully the sound will be okay for you guys.
While most of the crew brought extensive whitewater experience from abroad, the Peruvian scientists on the team had the most stake in the river and the most to learn from it.
Rafting. Oh. Para hacer mi primera experiencia en rafting me gustó mucho. Me encanta sentarme adelante del bote, con las piernas libres, el viento en la cara. Es peligroso, pero es muy, muy bonito.
Y estas dos actividades son probablemente muy útiles para los científicos como yo, que estudiamos los ríos y quebradas.
So that's my dream. Like after working like a few years in rafting, a few more years, my plan is to make a kayak school or a rafting school to teach more people to learn that and to do that sport, because it's really amazing like that they will take care more about the rivers.
Para mí la tierra está viva, como para muchas personas. Entonces, toda vida en esta tierra es importante, así sea del insecto más pequeño, para mí es importante. Por lo poco que he visto y bueno, en estos días de trabajo tiene una rica fauna, no solamente en la cuenca grande, sino de todos los tributarios.
And then I had, oops, I think this, just one other clip. The last clip, I think, it really exemplifies that it's really important to get the people doing the science and the scientific work access to these places. It really helps put things into perspective, and you start forming an emotional connection to the place that gives a lot of meaning to your work. But it's also that flip side where you have the scientists sharing with people who aren't scientists, that can create a lot of meaning for people. And so it was this two-way interaction between both of those parties on the trip that I think is something that's really important to keep in mind when planning these trips, that to try to facilitate a little bit of this, bringing people to the river who don't normally get to be on the river in that way. But then also for people on the river, getting them involved in understanding the environment that they are in so much a little on a deeper way. So here's a little clip of Jorge sharing his knowledge with some of the non-scientists on the trip. Is this the same one? Wait. Here, let's try this again. There we go.
The venom is here in
venom as well. Oh yeah, look, it'll kill a dog. It'll make us sick. A smaller one. Oh yeah. There's a big vein right here.
The venom is proteolytic and similar to some snakes.
It'll paralyze you.
Yeah, maybe something like this. Mi pasión por los insectos se inició desde muy pequeño. Será desde que era un niño. Todos ellos cumplen un importante rol en el ecosistema y además pueden ser usados en bioindicación de ambientes acuáticos. Pero es de esta manera que los insectos pueden indicar un grado de contaminación, ¿no? Por su presencia o ausencia o la variación en sus poblaciones.
Biggest thing at camp here is everyone's been getting into the communal collection of bugs, and whenever they see a bug, they yell, "Science!" And so I guess I just, it's that connection between people and creating that emotional connection and that access that you give between people, that the river is amazing and river trips are an amazing place to do it, to spur action. And I just have and it can have a lot of unintended like ripple effects and later down the road for river conservation. I just show my own example of this, but I'm sure there's been a lot from everyone on the trip. So Nancy, you know, I got to know Nancy on the trip, and she's highly involved in the Food of Waterkeeper. And later, like maybe the next year, maybe 2 years, because she knew me, she reached out to me when her town was going through some permitting or some concerns with gravel extraction, and she reached out to me to write a letter as a PhD scientist to the mayor of their town, just saying, hey, let's like think about this, or look at, these are some of the consequences that can happen from gravel mining. And I've been told that the letter actually made a bit of a difference, despite the fact that I had never been to that river. And I think having her get to know me on the river gave her the power to know who to contact in these sorts of situations and to help her out, and having the personal connection to her made me willing to do it and wanting to do it. And so
Natalie?
that, yeah.
We're almost okay. At 7 already, and it would be cool if you have a bit of time to actually discuss. So
okay, yeah.
Thanks.
I got it. And so that's kind of played out, and part of that thinking was that I started working on this idea of rapid river assessment of rivers at risk, which is this idea of taking rafting expeditions to get data, and then to be able to transfer that knowledge and have it be actually utilized by the people working on those efforts. I was talking about this while in Quebec to Jessica Drushko a few years back while working on a proposal that didn't get funded. But since then, she went on to switch her career and get into river science, helped, I think, form River Collective, where some of those ideas have been living on in this forum, which has been great. And then since that time, I've had 2 kids, so I've been a little less, having a little less time to do concerted focus on this thing, but that's why knowing this torch gets carried on. And then lately, I've been working on trying to really finally get all that Marañón data that we collected up on an online platform or a shareable place to be more usable for people like Luigi, who's on the ground working, or Nathan, who's planning future trips, and also thinking about what we can do to really mobilize our river communities. These people that are, a lot of my friends are whitewater kayakers and going to these really remote places all the time. And what can we do to make it easy for them to plug into, to be able to collect some of this insect data, collect some of this water data. It's really important for knowing the health of these systems. That is, like Nathan said, he was saying it's really hard to access these river corridors, but a lot of us river people are accessing them all the time. And so I've been trying to work on putting the data up on a platform, but not only that, trying to think about devising protocols or a way so that river people can easily link into it and have a set kind of thing to follow. And I think Vera was expecting me to talk a bit more about this aspect, but I realized I just needed to talk about where it comes from for people who are planning on trips and thinking about that and thinking about it as something that is a next step. And at this point in my life, I want to be able to keep moving this forward, but I do need help to do it, from more people to work on this idea with me, because I am not able right now with my young kid and my 2 young kids to move it forward at the pace that I think could be usable for like Luigi's efforts right now and Nathan's projects. So I'd be willing to chat more about some of those protocols and ideas in the chat session, or exactly what we collected, etc. So thanks, Vera.
Cool. Thank you, Natalie. Thanks a lot. Yeah, we're already at 7 o'clock, so I would be okay if people have to leave. But if people are willing to stay for a bit and to just chat, especially amongst also the 3 of you, I think that would be cool. Is that okay with all of you, Nathan, Natalie, Luigi? Yeah? Cool.
Yep.
Because one point I find quite interesting, like because you have the complexity of the river, right? And there's so many aspects linking to it. And it's a bit of a question to all of you, like, in a sense, we could keep trying to better understand it, and there's so many parts we have to understand in a sense. But isn't it also just a big thing to have to acknowledge that we just don't know, and that it's more important to kind of get people to acknowledge that, because I guess there's an unlimited kind of knowledge we could keep gathering. So what's the role of research in that sense? Does that make sense, this question?
Well, I mean, I think policy has to be set based on data. I mean, we have to understand where species are distributed in order to conserve those species. We have to understand, in terms of large-scale planning of hydroelectricity, in order, we have to acknowledge that there is a demand for power, and hydroelectric power is, in some sense, a green power. And there are ways in which to do it that have have much less impact to watersheds than others. Obviously, one major dam on a main stem channel low in a basin is going to have tremendous impacts that a number of smaller dams way up in the headwaters are not going to have. And so there is a lot of thought being given right now in terms of strategic planning for hydroelectricity across the Andes. The Marañón is just one basin. of dozens that are tributary to the Orinoco and the Amazon, and hydroelectricity is expanding all up and down the Andean flanks. And we can't just say no to hydroelectricity. I mean, governments are not going to stop building hydroelectric dams. I think it's a more constructive response to say, let's do it smarter. Let's think about where we can place these hydroelectric dams where they have minimal or less impact, placement in the watersheds at higher elevations where there's less biodiversity, and less chance of impacting migratory species. So all of these kinds of things are very data dependent, and so we're really at a critical phase for understanding these basins and trying to put that data into policy action and management in order to minimize impacts of things like hydroelectric dams.
Cool.
Yeah, and I think like it's I guess that kind of reason it's important to have the data, but I think preceding that, it's important for the policymakers to care about it, because sometimes I have seen situations where there's plenty of data, but it's how you use the data and what are your most what are your values as a person or a society, and is going to dictate how you use that data. And so I do think it's this tandem of having that data available, but then also creating these connections and this values for the biotic systems and to want to preserve them. And so, as far as my own research goes, it's some of an interesting caveat that because we don't know about everything. It's important to know where your wood is coming from. If your species in the lowlands are dependent on these trees coming in and eating them, for example, if a lot of it might not be true for the Marañón because it is, but if a lot of your wood is coming in from the headwater areas, but not lower areas, then you're going to have, it just depends on the basin, the situation, right? It's those any dams that block that transit might have a big impact on the lower basin species. So it's just another aspect to think about. And yeah.
Luigi, how do you feel like all these data are landing actually towards your government? Do you feel it's actually impacting?
I think in the case of the Marañón that is so understudied, it's actually a good thing, because there hasn't been much research, so all the decision making has been really on economic and from people that don't even know the place, not even like the environmental impact assessments are a joke, and anyone with a high technical knowledge can read those and see like, wow, this looks like a high school paper, not like a $1 million project, right? And really like studying the surface. And we actually, funny, like last year we had this kind of like a controversy, not controversy, but we were in this kind of funny situation where we got contacted by the Water Research Center to make all these studies, and we know that all these all the dam studies, all the people from the dam companies came through the river doing rafting and even like saying that they were tourists and they were not. So there was a lot of these like locals not trusting people. So we needed to take these researchers now, and they were like, oh, but we're from this research center from this university, and it's a new university, and the owners of this university are like the biggest investors, like the biggest Peruvian investors and the biggest corporate business groups for minings, and just the richest in Peru have made this university and this research center. And we talked a lot with the guys, and we were like, oh, now we're getting hired by the people that want to build these projects, right? And these guys were really neutral, and they are actually, they cannot say it, so they say, they are scientists, right? So they just want to study and like what Nathan was saying, right? They said basically the same. Like, we need to know better, so the decisions are being made with a proper understanding of what the impacts are going to be and what's happening, and we cannot refuse to that, you know. And if something is going to be done, and for sure things are going to still happen, so at least we can make sure that whatever is done is done the best way, right? And I think any research that comes to the lower Marañon will understand easily why you shouldn't make a dam down there. And if you do any proper research, I think the research is going to back us up and say, yes, it would be stupid to make a dam at least below 1,000 meters, like is the general rule lately, you know. So I think in this case we have, you know, like science is on our side. The more we know, I think it's gonna be better for the river, because especially for this lower part, it will not make sense. And in Peru, there's the corruption. I think is the deeper reason, and why the wanting of these constructions. So there's a lot of that also. So once the people know the river better, I think it's gonna be for sure useful.
Cool.
Vera, I'll just chime in there and say, you know, I've worked on a few hydroelectric projects in Guyana, in Peru, and in Ecuador, and the importance of data depends on who's funding the project, where the money is coming from. The projects that I've worked on have been funded by the Inter-American Development Bank, which actually has a fairly high standard for social and environmental impact assessments prior to any project that they fund, and so they need to be assured that these projects will not threaten the endangerment of any local species, will not negatively impact local cultures. Because of these strings that get attached to Inter-American Development Bank projects, a lot of dam building companies are seeking funding elsewhere because they don't want to meet these high standards. And China Development Bank is beginning to fund a lot more of these projects in Latin America, and they have very few of these strings attached. So in those kind of cases, in Ecuador, there's a classic example in the Napo Basin, Coca or the Coca project, in which there were very low standards in terms of dam construction, almost no environmental impact assessment done prior to dam construction. And so typically, in my experience at least, local governments are very easily swayed by the money, and the source of the money is ultimately where the concern and interest and impact of data comes from.
Mm-hmm. Cool addition. Yeah, I was by no means trying to say that data is not important, but it's indeed like a super political thing also, where it gets and where it, and in that sense, like Natalie, you're trying to really get a lot of adventurers involved, right? To be able to access places where normally researchers cannot really access, and that's helped by work like Luigi is doing. Nathan, do you feel like that is a useful thing for your research also, that people could continuously on a rafting adventure trip or whatever do some sampling?
Oh yeah, I mean, there's a place for citizen science. I think, you know, the strength of citizen science is volume. You know, is just really increasing capacity. The weakness, of course, is quality, and it can be kind of a challenge to scale up and maintain high quality. I think there's some fantastic examples of that within kind of macroinvertebrate studies. Where I went to graduate school at Auburn University is the home of Global Water Watch, an organization that organizes, that trains local people around the world in rural areas how to use macroinvertebrates to monitor water quality locally. They have a board game that comes with aquatic insects, you know, preserved, and teaches kids how to use aquatic insects to monitor water quality. And then they gather those data, they centralize those data in a central database. So I think there are examples, there are models of how, especially aquatic insects, fish present some unique challenges, of you know, a whole host of unique challenges, but macroinvertebrates are generally more accessible, less prone to permitting issues. There's less of a conservation issue with collecting aquatic insects. But at the same time, there is a degree of taxonomic training required to get kind of precise data for aquatic insects, and you need to make sure you're collecting data that gets associated with those samples, and the samples themselves are valuable. I mean, ultimately, whenever we're talking about biodiversity, that biodiversity data, that knowledge needs to be backstopped by specimens, because our knowledge of how to identify specimens, the taxonomy of biodiversity changes over time, and it's important to be able to go back to those reference collections and verify that what so-and-so called a given species in 20 years ago at a given site really is that species, and is not an undescribed species or something totally different. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I mean, there are opportunities, but again, it's just always that challenge of maintaining a high quality of data to go with that high volume of data.
Do you have anything to add there, Natalie?
Yeah, I think that there's an interesting, that's kind of different, there's different kind of goals between like a pointed like study or scientific study. You can get different information out of it, and as long as you're thinking about, the goals of the citizen science project are you're getting simple data over a wide geographic area, or over a longer or more repeated sample. You can get slightly different information than when you go and do a really detailed transect or study with someone, with like a scientist. And the river expedition kind of format's cool because you could have a specific researcher along, like Nathan, who does a really detailed study that gets a lot of amazing information. But you might also be able to train up a couple locals or river guides who go on the trip more regularly to be able to get not everything that you collected, but just the simple monitoring kind of aspect, I think is a really powerful for that, plus engagement of people into the watershed and an instillment of care about these places. And I mean, I think that's one of the reasons why we were getting involved from the United States and in these places overseas, is because a lot of our dams in the United States are, we kind of went on a dam building binge, I'd say, here. And a lot of the things that you don't think about as impacts are now coming to a head in the United States as far as big dams. The reservoirs are filling up or approaching their lifespan. Or like I live near the Columbia River Gorge, and there used to be huge salmon runs here that would basically feed lots and lots, like a lot of people, and a big economy based on the salmon runs. Well, they put in a bunch of dams that switched the economy from the salmon fisheries, basically of farming, a different way of eating and a different way of lifestyle. So when you do put in these dams, it is facilitating a transition between different types of economies and a different way of life. And I think just it's helpful to be 50 years, 100, 70 years down this road in the United States, and you have that sort of reflection on what's happened here, and some of the issues are now arising this long after building the dams, and then these other countries that are just starting to put them in. It's a learning opportunity to be like, we can do it smarter than we did, and there'd be less costs in the end. So I think that was that's something that I've interested in, or
cool.
for me.
Like maybe to round off, let's do a fast forward of 5 years and say like Marañon is still not dammed. Luigi's got this idea of having a research center at the conservation area. How can we really make this a learning opportunity for South America, I would say? I guess that's something feasible. Is that something you would get excited about, or is that something that's like, I'll just do my trip and whatever? Like, what would be the value of a research center on the Marañon, let's say?
Well, I mean, from my perspective, there's you know, we're just beginning to scratch the surface of understanding these river basins, and these big longitudinal gradient kind of studies are an enormous effort, enormously expensive, enormously challenging. But after you're all done and said, you have a sample size of 1 in terms of understanding fundamental structuring mechanisms of biodiversity in tropical river basins, or in Latin American river basins. So we've done this once in the Inambari. We're hoping to do it again in the Marañón. I'd like to do it again, maybe in the Napo, keep moving up the Andean chain. There are a lot of opportunities to do something like this in Colombia. So, and in particular, this next expedition, it's really going to be integrative. If it comes off, we're going to have anthropologists on board. We're going to have filmmakers. We're going to have photographers. And so we're really focusing on the multidimensionality of longitudinal gradients in river systems. And we're trying to develop a model that is going to be replicable, hopefully, to other basins. And then in terms of a conservation easement and site on the Marañón, of course, there will be, once we establish that baseline knowledge, there will be an infinite number of opportunities to continue to study the Marañón and to address questions in greater detail about the aquatic biodiversity there.
Cool. That's cool. Anything to add from Natalie or Luigi?
I think a research station is great. It gives a lot more access to a diverse, you know, it's not just one voice. It's many people, asking many different questions in which you understand a whole system, and it's listening to all those voices and having a center to facilitate more people asking different questions, I think is really important. Yeah.
Well, thank you guys for the work you do. It's awesome. And thank you, Vera, for organizing this. And yeah, I would like to add that for me, it's really, I mean, I'm super interested in all the science, and I enjoy learning about it. And I also enjoy sharing about it. And I think that adds a lot of value to our trips also. It's totally different when you bring tourists or, you know, adventurers, visitors to see a place, and you just see the place and you don't know much about it, but it's totally different experience when you can interpret and know about a little bit about the natural history as well as the cultural history, and that on the touristic side adds a lot of value to have more information about the place. And also I want to point out the advantage that we have, really, I think, because I've reached, like, I've made it to certain conclusions that after, like, talking with scientists and researchers, you know, they haven't been able to confirm it, let's say, because, for example, with the fish, you know, like WCS made all these huge analyses of how high the catfish go, and after years and probably thousands of millions of dollars, they said, oh, they made it all the way up here. And we do trips on the river all the time, and we come all the way from the upper sections, and we talk with the fishermen all the time. And I was like, oh, but I've seen catfish higher up than that all the time. The locals fish it. Yeah, they're little ones, not the big ones, but the little ones. And the scientists was like, oh yeah, they've never been there. They've never reached those parts, and they've never been, as Nathan was saying, the ability to have so many samples, right? Because you can take the best team, and in such a dynamic place like the river, with rainy season with high water and everything green, and in the dry forest in the low season with the river lower and everything drier, it's like a desert. You come here twice a year, and it's a whole different thing one time to the other season. So having that ability to be constantly on the place and sampling or having that observation, I think gives you a lot of knowledge, right? Like also with the bears, some ornithologists, they have no idea where this super endemic yellow-faced parrotlet, how high it goes. I can tell them, you know, I've been going down with bird watchers more than 10 times the section, where I know in this camp we see the birds, tomorrow we don't see them. somewhere in here, that's the limit. And for many trips, and it's always the same. You see the bird, next day you don't see it, and you don't see it again. Okay, that's the barrier sometimes. You will need like massive science to prove that, to confirm it, to make an study about it. But I'm pretty confident, you know, I can give you like 5 kilometers and scientists are gonna say it's there. And so that's, I think what the way for us to collaborate will be to having like simpler indicators. So maybe, yeah, we won't be able to do anything that is too technical or that requires any training, or maybe some basic training, because we would love to know about it and every trip do it, and encourage it with the locals, and even having more stations along the river, and it adds value to our trips, even because last year we did like a test with this. It had a name, this pipe
turbidity tube. I did a test for the turbidity tube.
So Natalie sent the turbidity tube, and we collected it, and Ben had a friend, an environmental engineer, not that she needed to be, but Ben had a friend joining a trip, and we gave her the task, and she felt great. And every morning, every afternoon, she would go and do the measurement, and she would enjoy it, and she would even feel like she has a responsibility during the trip. And I think any person in any trip will be happy taking a responsibility like that, to take 10-15 minutes of your day to make a simple measurement of something. But I think if we do that every year, and we've been doing it for 4 years, and we've missed 4 years already, so if we start doing it in 4 years, we could have a lot of simple data maybe, but a lot of collection that along different seasons, it can tell us something interesting. I'm sure, right? So I'm really looking forward to help in that way. Not only taking people, but being able to have any kit like Natalie is working on, and make it work. I think it's a really cool thing on different sites.
Thanks, Luigi, for saying that, because it's nice to hear how it kind of rolled out. And that's exactly what I think is, from my efforts working with like FUDA and everyone, and people are on the ground wanting to do something and get engaged, and there's too much information online, and it's mostly geared towards water quality rather than a comprehensive, like different indicators across like sediment and fish and different things. I've been trying to come up with a short list of simple things people can collect to get engaged. So maybe I'll just keep working, like Luigi, get your email and we can work with Ben, right? Is Ben involved in this a little bit on the Marañón?
Completely, like I'm partnered with Ben. We were doing everything together with the Waterkeeper and Marine Experience. We are full-time partners in all of this.
Well, you're motivating me to get my act together and get this polished
Send it
up.
together. Yeah, put it together and send it already.
I hope this talk was the motivation, but she just used like half a minute for that anecdote stuff.
I know. It's a process, Vera.
All good. And I'm happy to join in also, you know. Cool, yeah, I think it's about just getting different, and a lot of researchers really enthusiastic, because if you can talk for at least 1.5 hours when I've given you 10 minutes each, that means there's a lot of passion about your research on the Marañón, right? And indeed, it's so many little aspects that are valuable. So I think this is cool to just keep getting people to the Marañón. And I'm really excited about your trip coming up, Nate. And I really hope the funding is going to come through that.
Oh, thanks. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, that would be so cool. And I guess we'll give each other's email. You have each other's email addresses now, right? Like I've had you in the email together.
Oh yeah.
And we'll be putting this this recording online with a little blog post. So if there's any information you guys want to have on there, any links to websites or whatever, I can add them there so that it's kind of informative thing around the recording. Yeah, Luigi?
Vera, can I make one last question?
Yes.
About those pictures from Nathan. Nathan, those pictures are amazing. How are those like real? How do they look like on those dark background, like those fishes look crazy?
A lot of time with Photoshop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a proper technique, I'm
Maybe
sure,
more of a
but
Photoshop expert than a.
I'd take an aquarium in the field with me, and I'd have black background, and it takes a lot of time in the field to take good live color photographs, and then some Photoshop cleanup afterwards. So
Not something for the citizen scientist, I guess.
yeah,
they're shocking, you know, but they're worth it, man. They're so nice, so crazy.
Really cool.
yeah. Freshwater fishes, I think, are underappreciated because it's just so hard to get good live color photographs of them underwater, and coral reefs, you know, everything looks beautiful, but rivers, because of the turbidity and other issues, it's hard to get live color photographs.
Do you go snorkeling a lot on the river?
Yeah, I love to snorkel. But yeah, for these photographs, I'll bring a bottle of drinking water just for the photographs. That's perfectly transparent, and then have a specially built aquarium with a mobile pane in the middle that will restrain the fish in a position in the middle, and anesthetize them a little bit, and have a black background and so forth to get a good kind of portrait of each species.
Cool. Yeah, I had another fish biologist once who told me, if I just get the photos of these fish, everybody's gonna protect this river.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah, it's really important to get those good images.
yeah, and people will understand.
Communicate
Super
that.
cool. Super cool. Yeah, thanks a lot, guys. It's already half an hour over time. Thanks for joining us for so long. And I'm really honestly sorry that there's not that many people that joined in. I think it was partly just not having updated apparently the link on Instagram. I wasn't aware. I thought I was referring to our website with a good link, but it wasn't. So
Oh
it's
no,
definitely a bit my fault.
no
But
problem.
That's
It's
okay.
cool that it's recorded. It's cool
at
that
least
it's
I
recorded.
made it after kayaking. I put my group, I made them really tired early so I could stop early so I could join it. Resulted in a burnt face also. That was a good day. Cool. No, thanks a lot. And I really hope to meet you at some point. Like Natalie, I've been talking to you a few times now online, and it feels like I know you a little bit already, but obviously it's just been online, and I hope to actually see all of you in the Marañón at some point. That would be cool.
Oh,
That'd be
that would be
awesome.
cool.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks all for